so I think we're ready to go. Thank you everyone for joining today's presentation. Today's subject matter is how to essentially recruit top engineering talent through visa sponsorship. Just to kind of start off, to briefly introduce myself, my name is Nicole Gunara. I am the principal attorney of immigration here at Manifest Law. A lot of my areas of expertise include the EB-1A, the O-1 visas, EB-209Ws, and really any visas that have a handhold in corporate and business immigration. I have served a wide array of clients from startups to large multinational companies when it comes to establishing really strong and supportive immigration programs, both to the benefit of the beneficiary employee and also to the benefit of the wider organization as a whole. To also kind of briefly discuss Manifest, essentially Manifest Law is a tech-forward immigration service provider. We do think of ourselves as beyond the traditional law firm, as we provide a wide array of supportive services, including providing you a dashboard and a proprietary platform to derive insights related to your immigration program. We also have a very, very cool system that really prides itself in creating high percentage of approvals. And when it comes to cases, we're also extremely selective with the attorneys that we work with and that we have here in our organization. So that's a little bit about Manifest Law as a provider. Now, to the topic of the subject matter, essentially the problem that a lot of organizations are facing is that everyone is chasing the same candidates. Highly skilled engineering talent is extremely hard to come by. 74% of employers say that they're struggling to find skilled talent. And by 2030, demand for extremely skilled engineering talent is expected to outpace the supply by nearly 1.2 million engineers. I want to make it clear that it isn't that by 2030 or on 2030 that you're going to have this massive distance. Leading up to 2030, even until today, you're going to feel that constrainment already. The US is just not developing or producing enough STEM graduates to fulfill that demand. So this is a really key important metric that's contributing to this problem. Another element that is contributing to the problem is the fact that organizations have a hard time competing on compensation, right? Tech giants can afford really high salaries, really solid bonuses and stock options, making it difficult for startups and smaller organizations to attract top tier candidates and talent. They also, these large organizations like these FAANG companies also rely on foreign talent. So it's really important to really consider what options are out there to try to compete for that same grouping. Lastly, traditional recruiting channels are oversaturated. 75% of recruiters say they're seeing more competition for the same talent pools, with top candidates receiving multiple outreach messages per week. So that being said, what is the solution to this problem? The solution to this problem is hiring international talent. However, the problem with this particular solution is that immigration is a complex process, and many HR leaders and organizations don't have the bandwidth to become experts. Many HR teams also have bigger priorities than becoming fluent in immigration law, which makes it ever more important to find the right resources and to also outsource the expertise that you need in order to develop a platform to hire international talent. So the goal of today's webinar is to provide transparency into your options. So as a startup or as an organization, what can you do to deal with this problem and leverage immigration law to your benefit? So there's the typical immigration pathways. I think a lot of you who are on this particular webinar are already familiar with some of these, but just to rehash, traditionally, a lot of firms will say you can focus on these three pathways. So H-1B is a very common one. It's a specialty occupation visa, where essentially if you're an organization that's providing a bona fide job offer letter, and that role requires at least a bachelor's degree to fulfill, and the person has the degree and or experience to fulfill that particular role, then technically they qualify for the H-1B. The biggest issue though with the H-1B is that it is an annual lottery-based visa. So for the most part, if you have someone who hasn't had an H-1B in the past or who previously won the lottery in a different context, you're looking at a scenario where you have to base your job offer on luck, right? So to fulfill that particular role, it's actually quite challenging, even if the H-1B is appropriate or available to that candidate. The other pathway is also the perm process. So this is where an employer would sponsor someone directly for a green card in order to permanently reside in the United States. Whereas even like 4 or 5 years ago, this used to be a much faster process because of government backlogs and continued backlogs, regardless of who is leading the administration. It's taking more than a year to almost like 3 to 4 years, depending on the circumstances, to get to the end goal, which is holding that green card in hand to move to the United States. Lastly, there are organizations that can rely on something known as the L1 visa or the intra-company transferee visa, which allows a company in the United States to transfer an employee who is working for a foreign affiliated organization to transfer them to the United States. Give you a solid example. Imagine Citigroup had an office in Singapore, and Citigroup in the US wanted to transfer that employee from Singapore to the US. They could do so if and only if that person has worked at least 1 year in the past 3 years at that foreign affiliate. The biggest issue with this, especially for startups and in smaller organizations, is that you don't necessarily have a multinational presence at this time, and it may not be worthwhile as an immediate investment to get this pathway. So none of these are really the most ideal. So there could be other ways that we can try to accelerate the process or certain creative solutions. So some of the specific strategies that I try to advise a lot of clients to provide a short-term solution or alternative to the H-1B, and some of the items that we talked about on the previous slide, is to target nationals from very specific countries that have visas that are immediately available to them. For example, Singapore has the H-1B1 visa, very similar to the H-1B visa, where the role generally requires a bachelor's degree and you're offering it to them, and they have the degree or above to fulfill that role. Unlike the lottery system with the H-1B, Singaporeans can immediately apply for the H-1B at a consular appointment. To give you an example, the next available consular appointment in Singapore is in about, like, I would say 3 or 4 days from now. So it's a really quick turnaround time. Australia, very similar. There's something known as the E3 visa that allows Australian nationals to go to a consular appointment, apply immediately for a visa to work for an organization that provides them a job offer that generally requires a bachelor's degree to fulfill, and they have the degree or experience to fulfill it. Mexico and Canada also have access to something known as the TN visa, or a trade NAFTA visa, which allows people from certain occupations, and engineers being one of them, along with computer systems analysts, in order to quickly move to the United States and start working for an organization that's sponsoring them. For Mexican nationals, it requires them to go to a consular appointment, apply there, very similarly to Singapore and Australia. When it comes to Canada, it's even faster. It's done at the airport before they're going to board on their flight to the United States. And if they're driving into the United States, it can also be done at a border point of entry. So it's really a fast process for Canadian nationals in particular. Other options that people can consider include the O-1B, or the Extraordinary Talent Visa for creatives. And the reason why I tell people to consider the O-1B is because for creative-oriented businesses, let's say you focus on UI/UX design, essentially a creative person who is a UI/UX designer can get their own O-1B. They're an extraordinary talent. They're well known in the field. They have worked for a lot of prestigious companies in the past, and you can actually piggyback other employees on that O-1B. So if that person had a former colleague that was really, really good at graphic design, and they were really needed to create content for your organization or to support the work of that UI/UX designer, you can have them be sponsored under an O2 support staff visa as a supportive member to that O-1B. All of a sudden, you can have one O-1B candidate be able to lift up to 25 other beneficiaries to get a full team of individuals to the United States. Lastly, you can also establish a J1 specialist or trainee program. This is what I call the fastest band-aid. If you're really looking to bring someone to the United States who has a foreign bachelor's degree and at least 1 year of experience, or alternatively has just recently graduated from a bachelor's degree program abroad and it was within 1 year of that particular degree, you can actually bring them to the United States for an 18-month visa to work and learn about the United States and the US corporate environment. Outside of that, the golden carrot when it comes to recruiting talent, especially when it comes to highly technical positions, is green card sponsorship. A green card is a huge major talent magnet for, especially for people who are in the AI and ML fields, right? Sponsorship attracts top global talent because you're offering them stability in the United States. Green card holders as well also have the benefit of qualifying for many different US grants and roles because they do have an explicit requirement to have a green card status to qualify for such grants. And also strong green card supports usually leads to really significant inbound interest, even from top talent coming from FANG organizations. The reason why is because FANG organizations have consistently struggled with something known as the PERM life cycle or the green card sponsorship cycle. A lot of the times, these larger organizations may require someone to wait until they've been working for the organization for 4 years before starting this so-called PERM process. And so much can happen in the meantime before that cycle ends. If a layoff occurs or if a PERM audit occurs, that just significantly delays the timeline before that foreign national can get the green card completed and in hand. So sometimes people are working for about 6 years with no growth, no additional opportunities, are stuck in the same place because of this life cycle. So even if your organization can offer to half this time, you know what, 2 years of tenure, right? That's enough for us to prove that we should sponsor you for a green card. That is a significant golden carrot that can be utilized to attract talent away from some of these larger organizations that provide significant compensation packages that none of us, including myself, can really compete with. So there are also some strategies that organizations can consider in the long term, right? For example, there's recruitment directly at universities or establishing partnership, internship, and trainee programs. Essentially, students usually have some level of work authorization that you can leverage to meet your immediate labor force demands. And I'm not talking about generally bachelor's degree holders. I'm talking about people who are in graduate programs, whether it's master degree programs or PhD programs. That's because for the most part, and this is very much anecdotal, but I've seen it a lot of the times, by the time a foreign national decides to do a master's program in the United States or a PhD program in the US, they typically have already come to the United States with significant work experience. So this experience can be leveraged in your favor to start doing the work that needs to be done and fill in the seats that need to be filled in order to commit to your initiatives or your objectives in your organization. In the short term, students who are on these student visas, known as the F1 visa, can be provided something known as CPT or curricular practical training. To better illustrate the scenario, imagine if you were hiring someone who is in the middle of their master's program. That master's degree holder, or student would be able to go to their university, tell them that they want to work full time while completing their degrees, and they would be able to start working for you full time while they're doing their courses. Another pointed note as well is that people who graduate from STEM degrees are provided a 3-year work authorization to work for an organization. So if that student is interested in working for you, you now have someone who's at least committed for 3 years, and we can start leveraging the other pathways that we talked about earlier to get them even more time to remain in the United States. Another long-term strategy to really consider is establishing a foreign affiliated company, a subsidiary, a parent, or an affiliate or a branch. Just to kind of mention on this point, the definition of an affiliate is just another organization that has the same common parent or has common ownership with your organization, and a branch kind of speaks for itself. It's a foreign office that is affiliated with your organization. This is definitely long-term. It does require a bit of an investment from the company's part. However, it really can establish a very good long-term pipeline for foreign talent to work and reside in the United States to support your critical initiatives that are US based. Foreign employees would first be trained for 1 year abroad before being brought into the United States, which then creates this really long-term talent pipeline. Lastly, another long-term strategy that I've been able to advise a lot of clients in the past is to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to research associated with your company. I've also seen multiple companies unite and kind of put together a nonprofit organization. Essentially, the way that this works is that if you have a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to research and producing research, employees who were not selected for the H-1B lottery can then be sponsored by that nonprofit for even a 5 hour a week role for something that's quite simplistic, and then concurrently file a full 40-hour a week job at any private organization, including your own organization, without doing the lottery. So this is kind of like the secret, let's call it cheat code or key, to skip the lottery process or to provide a soft netting just in case something happens where an individual doesn't win the lottery for an H-1B or doesn't qualify for any of the other alternative visas. Highly recommend this if this is possible. I have seen a lot of organizations really pivot towards this pipeline because the lottery is sometimes the biggest obstacle for a lot of employers when it comes to maintaining talent or really recruiting talent in the United States. So these are some examples of creative solutions in action. I've spent many, many years advising a whole host of different types of organizations on how to establish really solid immigration programs. And these are some really key examples that can really show to all of you how immigration can be leveraged to fulfill roles very quickly. So the first example is logistics. There's a logistics company that I worked with, pretty large multinational organization, and they were really struggling with filling in engineering positions, primarily because their home bases in the US were in non-metropolitan areas, think like Idaho and Nebraska. They had a really hard time competing for talent from organizations that were based in cities like New York or in areas like San Francisco. So they did come to me with this problem saying, hey, Nicole, like it's really, really difficult to fulfill like these 5 roles that I need to be filled in like the next 3 to 6 months. So I advised them to start targeting advertisements in Mexico and Canada because I knew that there was a large population of highly educated individuals who were motivated to move to the United States, work to the United States, and commit their talents to a company because of the opportunities that the US provides, right? And they were less likely to be dissuaded by the fact that these opportunities happen to be in less than metropolitan areas, right? In targeting those engineering roles in these countries, the timeline to fill these roles went from 4 to 6 months to as low as 1 to 3 months. I see here that there is a question that was asked, just letting you all know that there is a Q&A section at the end of today's presentation. So I'm more than happy to answer more questions as they come up. Noting next, another example that was really, really helpful is that there was a company that was open to merging their organization with a nonprofit organization. I did encourage this merger because one of their struggles was being able to compete for data science talent. This organization happened to be based out of DC. There was a lot of competition for data scientists in that particular sector. So I advised them that merging with the nonprofit was not a bad idea, primarily because it would enable them to become CAP exempt. What does that mean? It means that they are now exempted from the lottery because the organization does produce publicly available research. Once they had that on lock, they had the ability to hire all the data scientists that they needed. Why? Because a lot of organizations cannot commit to the fact that these individuals will be able to start working for them soon or have to rely on the lottery. all of a sudden graduates from Georgetown, graduates from Harvard started flocking to some of this small organization because, hey, they're able to say, we're going to get you onto the H-1B immediately if you accept our job offer. Lastly, this was for one of my larger multinational clients in the past. I heavily encouraged them to start hitting all of the metrics to establish something known as an L1 blanket. So an L1 blanket is a government pre-approval. So imagine that the government pre-approves massive transfers over a period of time. They don't know how many people you're going to be moving over the next 3 to 6 years or 10 years, but it's an indefinite approval after a certain point. So once I got this blanket approved that allowed the company to transfer employees internationally because they didn't realize how many subsidiaries and affiliates that they had. So one of the interesting things is that as an immigration attorney, I actually became very familiar with their corporate structure. And I was the one that really proposed to them, hey, you really need to start going for this blanket because instead of relying on a base talent pool here in the US and maybe like one other country, now you can open up the pool to all 40 of your subsidiaries and affiliates. So they went from filling in seats in about a 4 to 6 month time frame to only about 2 to 4 weeks. Why? Because now they could go to France, they can go to South Africa, they can go to anywhere in South America that they had a tie to a company for and transfer them. And unlike a traditional L1 that usually has to be applied for via USCIS with premium processing, with those timelines and costs, when you have an L1 blanket approved, you're looking at a 30 to 50 page packet that an individual carries with them to a consulate, and they get approved right there and then at that appointment, so long as nothing has gone wrong at that appointment. So overall, a lot of these creative solutions were extremely impactful to a lot of my B2B clients at the time because listen, like you're going from filling in a seat from 4 to 6 months to only 1 to 3 months. There's many plant managers, many hiring managers, many departments that are happy to see those seats get filled in very quickly. So I see that there is an inquiry about E2 employees, which is a good option as well. The reality is that the issue with an E2, especially in the context of a startup, is that it requires that the majority of the owners of that organization belongs to the same treaty country, right? So if let's say 51% of the owners are from the UK and they don't hold dual citizenship with the United States and none of them holds a green card, that would basically disqualify their percentage from that 51%. Then an E2 makes sense because if 51% of your organization is owned by the same nationality of that treaty country, then they can sponsor employees from that same nationality. I've done those a lot for a wide variety of companies, but I find that it requires a specific ownership structure that and many times for startups as they're growing is difficult to maintain. I understand the importance of navigating a cap table, right? Maintaining certain availabilities, and those things can waver very quickly or be very difficult in an E2 scenario. I think one of the most celebrated, or I wouldn't even say celebrated, but damning cases was the Fendi case. Fendi went from being an Italian company to not being an Italian company, and all their E2 employees became stranded because they didn't think that far. So that's really it here. I hope that there was a lot here to kind of digest and learn on. Really, if you have any follow-up questions that are very specific to your organization or anything that you won't be able to share, you're more than welcome to directly email me at n.gunara, which is G-U-N as in Nancy, A-R-A, at manifestlaw.com with webinar in the subject line. That helps me flag that email much faster. And any questions, any concerns that you have, I'm more than happy to try to address to the best of my personal ability. Another thing that I will also note is that there are some reading materials on our website that could be helpful in illustrating what an L1 is, what an E1, E2 is, or any other educational materials related to the visas that we discussed today. You'll find a lot of resources on our website. And then lastly, open to Q&A. I just want to really reiterate a disclaimer before we start talking about the questions that we've received here. The information that I'm presenting to you guys or the answers that I give is not technically legal advice and should not be acted as such, primarily because usually you will need a consultation to make sure that all of the information that I need to deliver you a final prescription, so to speak, or a final solution in this case, really needs to be filtered out or fleshed out in a fuller conversation. So I can give you a very straightforward, superficial answer, or as much as I can in today's question and answer section. We did receive a few questions prior to the start of this particular seminar. Essentially, when you registered, you were allowed to kind of prompt us a question or give us some notes. So one of the questions that we were asked is, what is the current strategy for sponsoring O1s or EB1s when the individual does not have a profile of conventional academic accolades? So just for everyone's knowledge, the O1 and the EB1A in this circumstance is the extraordinary ability visa, O1s being a non-immigrant visa, a temporary visa, while the EB1A is a green card format of it. I want to remind everyone here that academic accolades are not the only thing that the government looks at for these categories. The government essentially has laid out, at least for the O1, about 6 or 7 different criteria that can be met, and you need to meet at least 3 of them. With the EB1, it's very similar, but except there's 10 categories and you need to meet at least 3 of them along with like a second step review. That being said, academic accolades really only impact about 1 or 2 of those available categories. For each person that has come through a consultation with me, I try to really advise them on what else they can target outside of the traditional academic formats, whether it's targeting press or something known as non-academic scholarly publications. When it comes to not being well cited, that's okay. There's a lot of great legal arguments, especially for engineers out there, about how it's a very practical field and not necessarily the scholarly field of the same nature as the natural sciences. When it comes to the second question here, where we have, does an O1B require press, for example, a funding announcement from a US publication? Of course, those things are extremely helpful for anybody to have, but it isn't a requirement. Same as my answer before, it can really be done in a multitude of ways. There are other criteria outside of press, but press can be helpful. Now to some of the questions that I see in the Q&A section. The first question that I have here is, can O1A visas be employed through a nonprofit organization as discussed in the long-term strategy number 3 in our slides today? The answer is technically yes, they can be. A nonprofit organization is still an employer. It's allowed to employ individuals. So if a nonprofit organization wanted to sponsor an O1A visa, they can. It doesn't have to be a for-profit organization. So in terms of touching upon a few other things that are commonly asked related to the presentation today, when it comes to recruitment, right, or talent acquisition strategies, I think a lot of people have a habit of forgetting about the power of the location, right? So Singapore, as I mentioned earlier, is an H-1B1 company, not company, but a country, and it allows people to quickly apply for a visa. I think Singapore is a heavily underrepresented or underrated country, primarily because they have a huge pool of highly skilled talent and engineers. It's a very strong STEM country, so to speak. It's just that they don't have a lot of local or domestic opportunities for growth. So you'd be surprised at how eager a lot of these countries are to quickly, or members of these countries to quickly move to the US because of the growth opportunities and learning opportunities that they can have here in the United States. The same thing goes for Canada. I know that they're right over the border, and kind of current politics aside, there's actually a lot of great talent right in Toronto and in Vancouver. Their education system is quite similar to ours in terms of structuring and the curriculum. So it's very easy to kind of culturally adapt, and they usually have the skill sets that we are looking for in terms of hiring, let's say, the traditional engineer or software engineer. Mexico also has a very strong academic curriculum. For someone to become an engineer and get something known as a licenciatura, you also need to complete not only 4 years of education, but there's an arduous exam that has to be passed at the end. So some people who graduate in Mexico might just end at a titulo, but if they have the licenciatura that is really required for the TN process in Mexico, it really means that they've kind of delved very deeply into their knowledge. They've passed what is essentially a quite difficult exam that really shows, at least foundationally, the knowledge level that they really have, right? So that's all I have. We still have a few more minutes, so feel free to ask any additional questions. It doesn't even have to necessarily pertain to specific things on today's presentation. At the end of the day, I am I guess, really fluent in immigration. So any issues or concerns that you have related to immigration, I'm happy to touch upon at this time. But also, I understand if you guys are organizations and you have very specific questions that you don't necessarily want to openly share in the Q&A. Again, the email address, just to kind of go back a few steps, is right here on the screen. It's n.gunara, Gunara, at manifestlaw.com. Please put the subject line webinar so I can quickly flag your emails faster than all my other emails. And I can try to get a question back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, so thank you everyone for your time today. I hope that you guys have garnered some insights to some of the strategies that we try to employ here at Manifest, along with some of the strategies that my clients have employed in the past. We really do think that we can craft some really novel and creative solutions that really suit your organization's needs. So any questions regarding any problems that you are encountering or any way that we can support the immigration journeys of your employees or to assist with your talent acquisition strategies, more than happy to advise and have a conversation about that. Right. Thank you.